Hello out there, my name is Milesy and welcome to my channel. I have got a pack of Gotti deal. I still don't know how to pronounce this. I've got a few of their paints before that I really liked, and when I saw that they had some markers, I decided to check them out. And they come in one of these loose, flobbery cases that I really don't like, but that seems to be fairly common. They use this same numbering system that a lot of these other markers will use, and my camera doesn't want to focus, but you can probably see that that says 120. And I can already see that there is a warm gray 0.5, which that is a really, it's not quite a colorless blender, it's a blender with a little bit of pigment, basically. And their grays kind of go all over the place. There's some warm, there's some cool. Yeah, it looks like it's just warm and cool. So let's look at the pens themselves. These have the bullet nib on one end, and then they have the chisel nib on the other. And I don't really use the chisel nib except for in very random weird circumstances. They seem kind of short. I don't know if that's just me though, but they seem kind of short. They're this square design that is fairly common, and the lid does fit on the back. A lot of these, the lid doesn't, so it's always really, really interesting. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what we have with these markers. So I notice two things. There is a pretty substantial amount of bloom on these, and the cap color is not really the best match, but it's not the worst ones that I've seen either. So you can more or less get an idea, but I still wouldn't totally trust it, I don't think. Ooh! Ew! I don't know what's happened there. That one I need to photograph. Really gross. Very sticky. Do I have some paper towels over here? I do. Okay, let's see if it works. It does still draw, at least. But I would not be surprised if Potato Brown runs out of ink. These ones do bleed out, but they don't seem quite as juicy as some of the other ones. That one, the nib is sticking out a little bit. They don't seem dry, but they're really not wet. So far, I love, again, these really muted, desaturated tones. These are always my favorite sets that have more warmer, earthy tones. There's not a lot of really bright, vibrant, unnatural colors. Those are nice for some projects, but sometimes you just want something a little understated. Ew, that one's really gross too. Take a picture of that one as well. That one's gross, and this nib is falling out. That, called Canaria Yellow, and that is intensely bright. Ooh, I like that shade of green. I also notice, like all of these other ones, it doesn't have the name of the color anywhere on the barrel. That seems to be pretty normal for a lot of these. Ooh. That is the third one. Another one. I think I'm just going to quit taking pictures at this point, because that is the fourth one so far. I have noticed that it's only the chisel side that is leaking too. And another thing I've noticed is that they're all stored chisel side down. This one looks like it got ran over by something. I don't know if you can see that. So I don't know if I got a bad batch or what, because I used their acrylic pens and I really liked those, and I had a set of, I think, either their watercolors or some acrylics, I can't remember, and I didn't have any problems with either of those, so I'm very surprised that the pens are bleeding as much as they are. So that is the 0.05, or the 0.5, and that's a lot darker than it is in other sets that have a 0.5. Now the cool gray one is lighter than the warm gray 0.5. You can kind of see that there are some really dark tones and then some really light tones. It doesn't really want to focus on it too well, but that is a good way to see how different your values are. And there's this one which shows up lighter than the page, so that's actually got, that yellow one's got a higher value than the paper it's on. And this one over here, only the bullet nib had a higher value. That one's brighter as well. There's a lot of really dark tones and a lot of mid-tones. There's only a couple really light tones in here. And unsurprisingly, most of them are those neon ones. I've got a couple that I don't mind because they're put together to actually keep square, but some of these, it is just impossible to get the pens to stay. Okay, there we go. But now that I've put them back, I think it's time to figure out what I want to do with these colors. So this was another piece that came from my iPad. It's something I started off drawing a while ago, and then for some reason it just never got finished, and I forgot to turn off my autofocus, I think, for the first little bit of this, so I apologize for that. And one of the things that I said I wanted to get better at doing was getting more comfortable with my inking and with my line art. So this one I decided to actually try doing the line art before I colored, and I was mostly using my Pigma microns, which I think I do like my Copic multi-liners a little bit better. There's something a little off about these pens in particular, and I did figure out, I think, why I find an easier time doing the inks after I've colored. And it comes down to the texture on the paper. Once I've colored it with the marker, that texture on the paper gets really flattened and squished, and it's a lot easier to keep my pen strokes consistent. And yes, I know my hair is getting in the way. But trying to keep my pen strokes consistent on this really roughly textured paper has not exactly been easy. But I did at least figure it out, and that's kind of bit me in the ass a little bit on a couple of pieces coming up in the future that you guys will be seeing later this week, where I went back to doing my line art after I did the marker. So I think for the next couple of weeks, my goal is going to be getting more comfortable with doing my line art first, like a normal, sane person, instead of doing it afterwards. I think doing it afterwards really is only going to work for pieces with watercolor, where the lines are more likely to smudge, which is something I thought I had an issue with, because I know that I have done pieces in the past where I was trying to do the ink first and then it smudged with the marker, but I think that just mainly came down to impatience in the end, where
I would try to erase it or try to color too quickly after putting down the lines, because after a few moments, even with these ones, I let it sit for about a minute or two, and that really did seem to help it not smudge, because I had no smudge problems with this, so I don't really know why I went back to doing it the other way later on. But I was really happy with how the lines turned out on this one, and I almost wish I had scanned the line art first before I colored it, but I didn't want to get up. It's a really big pain to scan in this book. It's a huge book. It's already falling apart and held together with duct tape because it really doesn't like being scanned or moved around. So I didn't get up to scan it. I have one very bad photo that I took to send to somebody after I'd finished doing the line art. And hello, yes, there's my face. But this is Kenneth. He's another character from Little Beirut who has not yet been introduced into the series. One of the things that I really want to do with the Little Beirut series is to have a bunch of interconnected storylines where characters in different parts of the city and different parts of the valley are connected through degrees of separation to one another. So his storyline doesn't really have anything to do with the current one that's being focused on right now in the main narrative, but he does connect in a different kind of way later on. I'm not sure when he will show up, but he's one of the younger crowd in the story, and I did notice this where using the ruler really made that pen smudge, but he's one of the younger characters that are in the story so far. Will and his cohorts are in their late 30s, and Kenneth and his social group are in their early 20s, so there's a pretty big age gap, and the things that these characters are going through and what they are facing in life are very different to the more, I guess, professional characters that are being explored now, which is something I have been having a lot of fun with. Is everyone has their own struggles and their own problems, and it really doesn't matter where you are in life, where you live, how old you are. Your problems are going to be problems no matter what. But he's a different one, and I can't wait to get to him. I can't wait to kind of show some of what's going on with him. But I don't really have anything in particular that was going through my head with this piece. For some of them I do, but this one, originally it was going to be for a visual novel, is what this was for. And then I kind of was looking into what it would take to do a visual novel, and the coding was not what made me less interested in doing it. I was more worried about the amount of art that I would have to do, the sheer amount of ridiculous art. So many sprites, so many backgrounds, and I wanted nothing to do with it. So that was kind of what killed the visual novel. But that visual novel is what eventually became Little Beirut, so I guess it's probably a good thing that I was really intimidated by it, because I'm able to do more with a fiction series than I think I would ever have the time or ability to do with a visual novel. So let's talk a little bit about these markers, because there were some issues with them. And I think this is the first alcohol set that I have looked at where I really had issues. I've had a couple where I didn't like how the markers were because they were water-based, and I think you've seen one of those already. I am not sure. But this is the first alcohol set that I really didn't like. And the reason why I didn't like them, it did come down to just how dry they were, because in a lot of the unboxing sections, I will sometimes film those weeks before I ever get the chance to use them with art. So those first impressions, are just that. They are first impressions. They're not necessarily accurate impressions. So when I said that they were blooming out, that was really before I had a good chance to get to know this new sketchbook, and it's pretty much just going to be a fact that any marker I put on sketchbook paper is going to bloom out. But I did also mention that a lot of them felt really dry, and that caused a very big problem, which I believe you are about to start seeing, because these ones dried out really, really quickly, to the point where I actually had to start using other marker sets before I was able to finish this. But yeah, they don't feel very thick or juicy or wet, however you want to phrase it. And right here, I was already seeing a problem where I was having a really hard time getting any amount of ink down. And I kept switching back and forth between nibs and was putting down so much pigment that it was starting to tear through the paper just to get it consistent. So I kind of gave up and just decided that nobody's going to see that because it's going to be in the shadow, hopefully, anyway. And I had thought that was going to be the last time that happened, but I was very wrong, because this one here, I forget what color it was, like a salmon or something, was already dry by the time I got over to this section. And I was having such a hard time getting any amount of pigment down, and for a second I thought it was just trying to do really big sections at a time. But I noticed that the nib, you could kind of see there for a second, was just completely dried out. There was no moisture in it, there was no pigment in it. And sometimes when that happens, it just means that the propellant is coming through, but not the pigment itself. But it wasn't just white, it was dry. So I grabbed the same color from a different set, and it was not really the same color at all. The one from the Goaty Deal set was very orange, the other one was very pink, so they didn't really match at all. And at this point I had kind of decided that since these markers were not going to be super reliable, and they didn't have the best gray selection to begin with, that I was going to do the color with this set, and then I switched over to my Artex set, which has like 36 shades of gray or something like that, which there's a joke in there to be had, but that one has a really nice selection of gray, and I think that's going to probably be one that I continue to buy with my own money. I think I looked at it in an unboxing video that you guys probably haven't seen yet, but those are really nice markers, that gray set. I was really incredibly happy with everything about that gray set, so highly recommend it. And this one, I kind of was trying to learn from the mistakes that I had made during the piece with Simon and Janine. And even though this one is all marker, I was still doing the same thing. I wanted to lay down the highlight first before I started to shade with it, or to shade. And I think it really helped. There were some big problems with this one, some of which were stemming from the markers just not being very nice themselves, and others stemming from the fact that I was trying to get very, very ambitious on sketchbook paper. But I wanted to also revisit that shading style that I had done with the werewolf, and I had kind of forgot that the Artex bullet nib is really weird, and it's really recessed and hard to get to, so I kind of kept switching between the bullet nib and the chisel nib, which even at the beginning, I think I said that I don't use the chisel nib very often. Again, that was filmed a while ago, and I've since actually really started using the chisel nibs a lot more. I've figured out how to use them, I think, a little bit better. They're definitely better for blending, which I've never been very good at to begin with. So getting better at blending, all of a sudden those chisel nibs make a lot more sense, and I've been using them a lot more. There are some issues with his shading on his face that I don't like. I kind of wasn't paying the most attention. I was mainly trying to get the technique down, and that meant I quit paying attention to the actual form of his face, which I regret, but what can you do? But he turned out, I think, despite my weird anatomy issues and despite the markers being really dry and kind of crummy, he turned out really nice. I think this shading style, I want to do some pieces on Bristol board with it, because I think it could look really nice on better paper especially, but even getting it to work on this really crummy sketchbook paper has been getting easier and easier. He turned out weirdly dark, a lot darker than I would have liked, and some of his shading was a little bit not smooth. I'm not really sure what I was going for, but it could have been smoother and his face could have turned out a little bit better, I think. But overall, I am really pleased with this one. And I do think this is something both in technique with the markers and with the inking that I want to get better with. I want to get more comfortable with ambitious shading and with really dramatic shading, and I want to get more comfortable with my markers. If you follow me on DeviantArt, I did put up another gallery or folder or whatever they're called for a bunch of really old art, and I noticed the confidence I had 15 years ago when I had no idea what I was doing is so much bigger than the confidence I have today. I really thought I knew what I was doing when I didn't, and so there's a lot of really cringy art that I've posted in a folder. Not cringy because of the style or the techniques that I was using, but cringy because I really thought I was the best artist on the site, and oh boy did I have an attitude about it. I'm really glad I've grown out of that, but at the same time, I do miss that lack of, or that confidence that I had. I've got such a really bad lack of confidence right now that I'm trying to really kind of get that back, and hopefully I can by the end of this whole thing. But I'm really pleased with him. I'm really pleased with how this whole thing turned out, and I think I did learn quite a lot from doing it. I really think I did. But the markers themselves, I'll put a link to them down below so that you can check them out if you want to. I do think there are better ones. I'll also put a link to the Artex set again, because that is a really decent set. But thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, all that fun stuff, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!